we're witnessing something unprecedented unfold in real time. What we're seeing isn't just political turbulence or the usual coalition reshuffling that's marked Israeli politics for decades. This is different. This is a society tearing itself apart from within, and the cracks are no longer superficial, they're structural, they're deepening, and they may soon become irreparable. Let me be direct about what's happening right now, in November 2025. Netanyahu's government is clinging to power with a 61-59 majority, the thinnest possible margin. Itamar Ben-Gvir, the far-right national security minister, already walked out over the ceasefire. Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, has one foot out the door, threatening to collapse the coalition if the Gaza ceasefire continues. This isn't governance. This is hostage-taking, where extremists hold an entire nation's policy captive to their ideological demands. But here's what's really alarming. Netanyahu isn't trying to heal these divisions or build consensus. He's doing the opposite. In August, his government voted unanimously to fire the Attorney General, Gali Baharav Miara, the very person prosecuting him for corruption. Think about that for a moment. The Prime Minister, facing bribery and fraud charges that could send him to prison for 10 years, successfully convinced his entire cabinet to fire his prosecutor. The Supreme Court immediately blocked it with an injunction. But the message was sent. Netanyahu will tear down every institution, every democratic safeguard to save his own skin. And it's not just the Attorney General. He tried to fire Ronen Bar, the head of Shin Bet, Israel's internal security service. Why? Because Bar was investigating Netanyahu's aides for alleged ties to Qatar in what's been dubbed Qatargate in Israeli media. The head of your domestic intelligence agency is investigating potential collusion with a foreign power that backs Hamas. And your response is to fire him? A former Supreme Court Chief Justice didn't mince words. She warned of civil war. Now, I want you to understand something crucial here. When we talk about the threat of civil war in Israel, we're not speaking metaphorically. We're not being hyperbolic. Let me walk you through what's actually happening on the ground. In March 2025, tens of thousands of Israelis marched on the streets for days, surrounding Netanyahu's residence, blocking highways, demanding he end the renewed war in Gaza. One protester, interviewed by CNN, said something chilling. "I'm very concerned about the possibility of a civil war. This nation is divided. It sometimes seems there's no way out. People don't believe in democracy anymore. You see the division. Religion on one side, secularism on the other. It seems hopeless." Then in August, the protests exploded. 500,000 people in Tel Aviv alone. Organizers claim 1 million across the country. That's more than 10% of Israel's population. That's equivalent to 33 million Americans taking to the streets on the same day. They're demanding an end to the war, the return of hostages, and Netanyahu's resignation. The police respond with water cannons and mass arrests. Since January 2023, over 1,600 Israelis have been arrested at protests. There are documented reports of police violence, physical assaults, mounted police charges, even stun grenades used on demonstrators. And here's the most dystopian part. Netanyahu's Shin Bet has been conducting surveillance on Israeli citizens involved in these protests. That's right, the Domestic Intelligence Service is spying on Israelis exercising their democratic right to protest. This is the behavior of an authoritarian regime terrified of its own people. But let me tell you about the other side of this divide, because this is where things get truly dangerous. In October 2025, 200,000 ultra-Orthodox men flooded Jerusalem, a sea of black suits and hats, blocking roads, shutting down the capital. What were they protesting? The audacity that they might have to serve in the military like everyone else. Let that sink in. Israel is fighting on multiple fronts Since the 7th of October 2023, over 900 soldiers have been killed. Reservists are serving hundreds of days away from their families, their jobs, their lives. The military is screaming that it needs 12,000 more combat soldiers. And you have 66,000 ultra-Orthodox men of military age refusing to serve, claiming that Torah study protects Israel more than soldiers do. One ultra-Orthodox rabbi actually said this publicly. Let me quote him directly. "We and only we are the defenders of Israel." To come and say, you are not at risk, we're at risk, is factually incorrect. He was speaking to soldiers who are literally dying in Gaza, telling them that yeshiva students are the real protectors. Another rabbi wondered aloud how many Air Force personnel have died, suggesting they should go to Rafah, so they'll be at risk too. This isn't just about military service. This is about two fundamentally incompatible visions of what Israel should be. 71% of Israelis say the most acute conflict in their society is between secular and religious populations. Not Israeli and Palestinian, not left and right, secular versus religious. And the demographics are shifting rapidly. For the first time in Israel's history, more first graders started school in religious institutions than secular ones in September 2025. The future is being written, and it's increasingly Haredi. Here's what makes this explosive. The ultra-Orthodox don't just refuse military service. 40% of Haredi men don't work. They're publicly funded to study in yeshivas. They receive housing subsidies, child benefits, and welfare, while contributing virtually nothing to the economy or national defense. The Bank of Israel calculated that the cost of not drafting ultra-Orthodox men is about 10 billion shekels per year, roughly 0.6% of GDP. Meanwhile, the Haredi parties in Netanyahu's coalition have secured billions more in funding for their institutions and communities. The secular majority is subsidizing a population that rejects the basic obligations of citizenship, and the resentment is becoming toxic. 80% of Israelis want a government that promotes equality in the burden of service. 72% reject the Haredi claim that Torah study ensures Israel's safety. 54% want a government without the ultra-Orthodox parties. But because of Israel's parliamentary system and Netanyahu's dependence on these parties to avoid prison, the majority will is being thwarted. This brings us to Netanyahu himself, and here's where personal and national crises become inseparable. This man is on trial for bribery, fraud, and breach of trust in 3 separate cases. The trial has been going on for 5 years. He's testifying 4 times a week, or he's supposed to be, when he's not requesting delays for urgent diplomatic meetings or health reasons. His lawyers threatened to quit if the court didn't reduce the hearing schedule. Netanyahu told the court he's in the most difficult position in the world and can't possibly attend court 3 times a week while running the country. But here's the thing, and this is crucial to understand. Many Israelis believe he's not running the country for the country's benefit. They believe he's prolonging the war, sabotaging ceasefire negotiations, and refusing to release hostages because the moment the war ends, he loses his political protection. War gives him cover. War keeps his far-right coalition together. War keeps him out of prison. Look at the timeline. In May 2024, President Biden presented a ceasefire framework. Netanyahu rejected it. Months passed. The hostages remained in Gaza. Then Trump was elected, and suddenly, magically, Netanyahu accepted virtually the same deal in January 2025. Why? Because Trump threatened hell to pay if there wasn't a ceasefire by Inauguration Day. Netanyahu responds to American pressure, but not to the pleas of Israeli families whose loved ones are dying in Gaza tunnels. Then, just weeks into the ceasefire, in March 2025, Netanyahu breaks it. The official excuse was that Hamas wasn't fulfilling its obligations. The reality? His far-right partners were threatening to collapse his coalition. Ben-Gvir was out, and Smotrich was wavering. Netanyahu needed them to pass the budget by March 31st. So he restarted the war, brought Ben-Gvir back into the coalition, and secured his political survival. Never mind that this decision was made against the wishes of his own military leadership. Never mind that every poll showed the majority of Israelis opposed it. And it worked from Netanyahu's perspective. His coalition survived the budget vote, but at what cost? The hostages remain in Gaza. Only about 20 of the remaining 50 are believed to still be alive. The military death toll continues to rise. The economy is buckling under the strain, and the society is fracturing beyond repair. Let's talk about that economy, because this is the other sword hanging over Israel's head. Former chief economists are warning of a financial crisis within 3 to 5 years if the government doesn't get its fiscal house in order. The deficit hit 7% of GDP in 2024. Military spending has exploded. Public services are being gutted. The former governor of the Bank of Israel warned that hospitals, schools, and public transportation are at risk of collapse because defense spending is crowding out everything else. Israel's credit rating has been downgraded multiple times. The cost of war-related spending has pushed debt to unprecedented levels. And here's the kicker. Government economists calculate that the monthly cost of a reserve soldier is about 48,000 shekels. Businesses lose employees repeatedly for extended periods. Productivity craters. Investment falls. The high-tech sector, which generates 20% of Israel's GDP, remains resilient for now, but even that has its limits. The OECD released a report projecting Israel's growth at 3.4% in 2025, lower than local forecasts, and heavily dependent on reducing the conflict. The IMF is even more pessimistic, downgrading its projections amid Trump's global trade war.
Israel's current account surplus, its cushion of foreign currency from exports, has been slashed by 32 billion shekels in recent projections.
The economy can't sustain indefinite war while maintaining a modern welfare state. Something has to give. And what does Netanyahu's government do? They keep passing budgets that prioritize coalition politics over national needs. They distribute discretionary funds to coalition partners. They increase subsidies for yeshivas and ultra-Orthodox communities. They refuse to make the structural reforms economists say are essential. The former Bank of Israel governor said it plainly. This government doesn't understand the scope of the economic problem it faces and is choosing to ignore the dangers. So you have a perfect storm. A society split down the middle on fundamental questions of identity, a government held hostage by extremist parties, a prime minister fighting for his political and personal survival, an economy under unsustainable strain, a military stretched to breaking point, democratic institutions under assault, international isolation growing, and underlying all of this, a complete absence of any vision for the future beyond perpetual conflict management. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the Palestinians. Because while Israelis are focused on their internal crisis, there are 5 million Palestinians living under Israeli control in the West Bank and Gaza, who have no rights, no citizenship, no vote, and no future under the current system. The occupation doesn't appear in Israeli political discourse, except as a security issue. The idea of a Palestinian state is effectively dead. The Knesset voted 68-9 against it. Even opposition leader Benny Gantz voted no. What's the plan then? Permanent occupation? Annexation? The Israeli far right says yes to annexation. 57% of ultra-Orthodox Israelis support annexing all Palestinian territories, turning millions of Palestinians into permanent non-citizens in an apartheid state. But only 23% of secular Jews support this. So even the solution preferred by the right is divisive and unachievable. Meanwhile, The occupation radicalizes everyone it touches. Israeli soldiers become brutalized by the work of occupation, checkpoint, duty, night raids, controlling a hostile population. IDF reservists have published open letters saying the war serves political and personal interests rather than security ones. Over 1,000 pilots signed a letter protesting the government's policies. There's an organized campaign encouraging young Israelis to refuse military service altogether. The occupation also requires the constant use of force to maintain control. A recent Associated Press investigation documented Israeli soldiers using Palestinians as human shields in Gaza and the West Bank, a practice that's supposedly prohibited but has become routine. Israel's international reputation is in freefall. The International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu and his former defense minister for war crimes. Israel faces a genocide case at the International Court of Justice. This isn't sustainable. You can't run a democracy while ruling over millions of people without rights. You can't maintain international support while using methods the world considers war crimes. You can't build a prosperous society while dedicating endless resources to occupation and war. Something has to break, and it's breaking now. What we're seeing isn't just a political crisis or an economic crisis or a social crisis. It's all three simultaneously compounding and reinforcing each other. The political crisis makes the economic crisis worse, which intensifies the social crisis, which makes political consensus impossible. It's a death spiral. The international dimension makes it worse. Trump may be supportive now, but he's already set red lines. No annexation of the West Bank. Stick to the ceasefire. And Trump's patience isn't infinite. When his peace plan conflicts with Netanyahu's political survival instincts, what happens? Support for Israel in the Democratic Party has collapsed. Young Americans, even young American Jews, are increasingly critical. The next time there's a Democratic president, Israel will face a very different Washington. In Europe, the isolation is even more severe. Spain has barred Israeli ministers from entering the country. The European Parliament is debating sanctions. Trade relationships are under strain. Israel is becoming a pariah state supported primarily by authoritarian governments and far-right movements in the West. That's not a sustainable position for a country that depends on Western technology, investment, and security cooperation. So where does this go? Let me sketch out the scenarios. None of them good. Scenario 1. Netanyahu clings to power indefinitely. His coalition fractures and reforms repeatedly. The judiciary is eventually broken. Democratic norms erode. Israel becomes an illiberal democracy at best, an authoritarian state at worst. The secular-religious divide hardens into permanent separation. Ultra-Orthodox population growth continues to shift the demographic balance. Within a generation, Israel becomes a theocracy. Secular Israelis emigrate in large numbers. The high-tech sector relocates. Economic decline sets in. International isolation intensifies. This is the slow death scenario. Scenario 2. The system breaks suddenly. A spark, maybe a particularly egregious government action, maybe an ultra-Orthodox attack on secular Israelis, maybe military mutiny ignites large-scale violence. Secular versus religious. Tel Aviv versus Jerusalem. Military units fracture along ideological lines. You get actual civil war, not metaphorical civil war. In this chaos, external enemies see an opportunity. The country that prides itself on strength and deterrence proves fragile when divided against itself. This is the fast collapse scenario. Scenario 3. The crisis forces political realignment. Netanyahu is finally removed by election defeat, by conviction in his trial, by coalition collapse, or by his own party turning on him. A unity government forms, bringing together center-right and center-left forces. They attempt serious reforms. Judicial independence restored. Economic restructuring. Mandatory universal service, including ultra-Orthodox engagement with the Palestinian issue. But this requires the very political courage and consensus that's been absent for years. And even if it happens, the ultra-Orthodox community won't accept it peacefully. You're looking at sustained civil unrest at minimum. Scenario 4, external intervention reshapes everything. The US, seeing a strategic ally imploding, imposes a solution conditioning aid on specific reforms, demanding political changes, forcing a resolution to the Palestinian conflict. This would be unprecedented American pressure, and it's unclear if even that would work given how entrenched positions have become. It might just accelerate the crisis. None of these scenarios end well. That's the point. Israel has reached a juncture where all paths forward involve serious pain, major disruption, and fundamental transformation. The status quo is unsustainable, but every alternative requires confronting deep structural problems that the political system has avoided for decades. The tragedy here is that this was predictable and predicted. Israeli writers, activists, and academics have been warning for years that you can't maintain a democratic state while occupying another people. You can't build a cohesive society when a large minority rejects basic civic obligations. You can't sustain rule of law when the prime minister is above the law. You can't have stability when political survival trumps national interest. But these warnings were ignored or dismissed as leftist hysteria. And now here we are. 500,000 people in the streets. A prime minister on trial refusing to step down. Ultra-Orthodox communities rejecting the state's authority. An economy buckling under impossible pressures. Institutions under assault. International support evaporating. And two profoundly incompatible visions of Israel's future locked in zero-sum conflict. What makes this particularly dangerous is that both sides see themselves as fighting for Israel's survival. The religious right believes that secularism, territorial compromise, and judicial activism will destroy the Jewish state. The secular center-left believes that theocracy, permanent occupation, and democratic erosion will destroy the Jewish state. Both think they're saving Israel from the other side. That's what makes compromise nearly impossible and conflict nearly inevitable. The rest of the world needs to understand what's happening here. This isn't just another chapter in Middle Eastern instability. This is a nuclear-armed state, a major US ally, a central player in regional dynamics, potentially heading toward internal collapse or civil conflict. The implications extend far beyond Israel's borders. And for those who care about Israel, genuinely care about its survival and flourishing, the kindest thing you can do is tell the truth about what's happening. Not deny it, not minimize it, not excuse it. The diagnosis has to be honest before treatment is possible. Israel is heading towards civil war, not because of external enemies, but because of internal contradictions that have reached breaking point. The political system is paralyzed. The society is fractured. The leadership is corrupt and self-serving. The economy is under unsustainable strain. The occupation is untenable. The international position is deteriorating. And there's no plan except maintaining the status quo until it breaks. When it breaks, and it will break, the consequences will be catastrophic. For Israelis, for Palestinians, for regional stability, for American interests, for global security. This isn't hyperbole. This is the logical conclusion of trends that are accelerating, not reversing. The question isn't whether Israel faces an existential crisis. It clearly does. The question is whether there's enough political will, civic courage, and shared vision to navigate through it. Right now, the answer appears to be no. And that's why those of us watching from outside, those of us who try to analyze these situations honestly, are increasingly pessimistic. I don't say any of this with satisfaction. I say it with deep concern. What's unfolding in Israel should worry anyone who cares about democracy, stability, or human dignity. Because when societies fracture this deeply, when institutions fail this completely, when leaders choose personal survival over national interest, history shows us where that leads. And it never ends well. The nightmare scenario isn't hypothetical anymore. It's emerging in real time. The question is whether anyone with power will do anything to stop it before it's too late. Right now, that seems unlikely. And that's perhaps the most tragic part of this entire situation. Israel's approaching civil war isn't inevitable in the sense that nothing can be done. It's inevitable in the sense that nothing is being done. And with each passing day, each protest suppressed, each institution attacked, each extremist demand accommodated, each ceasefire broken, the point of no return gets closer. We're watching a democracy commit suicide in slow motion. The only question left is whether anyone will intervene before it's too late. And based on everything we're seeing, the answer appears to be no.